I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. With the emergence of GLP-1 agonists to treat obesity, there's been growing interest in the use of peptide-based medicines. Protagonist Therapeutics has developed technology that can take these target-specific and potent therapies and allow them to be delivered orally. The company has a collaboration with Johnson & Johnson for an oral peptide that blocks the IL-23 receptor that's in development to treat psoriasis and ulcerative colitis. We spoke to Dinesh Patel, CEO of Protagonist, about the company's platform technology, the benefits of orally delivered peptide therapies, and where he sees the biggest opportunities for this approach. Dinesh, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
We're going to talk about peptide therapies, Protagonist Therapeutics, and how it's able to address the challenges for delivering oral peptide therapies. Let's start with peptides, though. For listeners not familiar with them, what are they?
If you look back at the history of the whole pharmaceutical industry, which is about, I would say, let's say 60, 70 years old, in the earlier days, we were working just with oral small molecules, right? Uh, Aspirin, the statin drugs, blood pressure reducing agents. Those were all small molecule oral drugs. You take a pill, a tablet, or a capsule, you are done with it. Then, with further advances in biological sciences over the past few decades, you have seen the rise of the big biologics. So, these are the injectable antibody drugs. During evening time, if you watch TV, then it's hard to skip some of these commercials on, the Stellara and the Skyrises and the Humiras of the world, right? Now, so the two opposing characteristics are small molecules are oral, but now when you go after, but let's say all the low-hanging fruit was picked in the first 4 decades of our industry, and then over the last 2 decades, people focused on injectable biologics, and these are much bigger, let's say at least 100-fold bigger in size compared to small molecules. Peptides are somewhere in between. They are a little bit bigger than small molecules, but much smaller than the big biologics. So now the question is, are these going to be injectables or are these going to be oral? And as you can imagine, as you make a chemical entity bigger, the challenges of making it orally stable becomes more intense, right? Human body is designed to process food or medicinal products, which are nothing but chemical entities, to break down into smaller bits and pieces that could be easily absorbed by the body for nutrition. So you have to work against the capability of the human GI tract in order to make this orally stable. So that was for the longest time one of the biggest challenges. But in short, peptides, so far largely as injectables, will offer a differentiation where, let's say, neither oral small molecule or an injectable big biologic would not be able to do a very good job. So the opportunity so far has been few and far in between. I mean, we started our company Protagonist almost 1.5 decade ago with the exclusive focus on peptide therapeutics. And the only way we could come up with a solid differentiation was that, hey, if we can go after those biological pathways that have paved the path for multi-billion-dollar kind of injectable antibody drugs, what if we chose the same biological targets and pathways, but now instead of an injectable antibody, we offer an oral peptide. Most of these injectable antibody drugs are for very chronic indications where a patient needs the drug for the rest of their life. So, an oral drug will create a huge differentiation and will be a much desirable drug entity for the patients at the consumer level, right? So that's basically how we are approaching things here. Now, what has happened though is in the last 12 to 18 months, everything has changed in the field of peptide therapeutics. If I mentioned the word anti-obesity drugs 2 years ago, people would be like, "What are we talking about?" But now everybody, even non-scientists, are like, "Hey, I'm taking semaglutide from Novo Nordisk, or I know what Wegovy is and Zepbound is, and things like that." There are only two drugs that are approved. Both are injectables, one from Eli Lilly in the US, the other from Novo Nordisk in Copenhagen, and both are peptides. So all of a sudden now peptides are a much more familiar vocabulary to the most common man. And all of a sudden, Protagonist now has a wonderful opportunity of differentiation by trying to come up with an oral peptide approach in that field as well.
This is a broadly applicable technology, but what might make a disease a good candidate for an oral peptide therapy?
Yeah, so in science, people fall into the common trap of like, hey, if my science works, my technology works, I will just apply it. And a lot of time, what that leads to is a scenario where you will conclude that, hey, I won the battle but lost the war. And what I mean by that is like, fine, my technology worked, but what did I create in the end? Is it any different or better or superior than what is already out there? So, where you apply your peptide technology platform is very critical, right? It's something where neither the small molecule approach has offered any good satisfactory results, nor is an injectable antibody drug for the rest of your life like a desirable property to have. So that is where the application that you seek out with this kind of platform is very useful. We have so far found utility in three broad categories. One is in the inflammation and immunomodulatory space that I just referred to, right? Well, this is where you see these TV commercial ads from companies like AbbVie and Bristol Myers Squibb and J&J and Pfizer and all those companies. Very validated targets, multi-billion dollar drugs for diseases like psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, inflammatory bowel diseases like Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, arthritis in general, those kind of things. And almost everything and anything that is out there dominantly are injectable antibody drugs. What have done in that category is we have come up with an oral peptide approach that will basically intervene the same pathways and lead to the same kind of results. One of the place where we have been amazingly successful, and this is getting a bit technical, but is in the interleukin 23 pathway. But in common man's language, if you look at J&J's pipeline, they have two antibody drugs, Stelara and Tremfya. Those garnered 14 billion in revenues for the company last year. And these are both working through the intervention of the IL-23 pathway. What we have done is come up with an oral peptide that works on the same pathway. Now, we have also joined hands with J&J on this project since 2017. So this is a partnership that is in the works for 7+ years. And now we have found amazing success. J&J has shown a big commitment to our drug. They are doing 5 phase 3 studies in psoriasis, and they are also doing a phase 2 study in ulcerative colitis. So a lot of things at stake over here, but our phase 2 data in psoriasis was excellent. So we are very optimistic about the drug. But that is a real example, a real successful example of the utility of our platform in the inflammation and immunomodulatory space. The other place where we have been very successful is coming up with mimetics of natural hormones. In our body, we have hormones that have different functions, and then sometimes there is an imbalance. You may have an overproduction or underproduction of that hormone. So either a hormone or a synthetic mimetic is what is needed in those instances. So one of such things that we focused on was hepcidin. So it's a natural hormone in our body. It's the master regulator of iron homeostasis. So we came up with a synthetic mimetic of hepcidin. It is named as rusfertide, and currently it's in a phase 3 study in polycythemia vera. Polycythemia vera, or PV, is a rare blood disorder where these individuals, they make too many red blood cells. So they have like a red blood cell overproduction. And as you can imagine, if you make too many of these cells, then your blood gets thicker. It is commonly referred to as the thick blood disease, but then ultimately you have to worry about increased probability of heart strokes and mortality occurring from those sort of cardiovascular disorders. So this is another success story where we started with discovery, innovating the drug through our technology platform, and fast forward 6, 7 years, and now we have the drug in phase 3 study. And more recently this year, in late January, we announced a partnership with Takeda Pharmaceuticals in Boston. And so we have joined hands with them for the development of this drug. So, and then the third place where we kind of have applied our platform now more recently is in the oral obesity camp. As I mentioned before, the injectable peptides as anti-obesity agents, this became sort of like a common knowledge about 2 years ago, I would say. And we protagonists have special expertise in oral peptides. So that was almost like an open invitation for us to join the party of, the zeal for the best anti-obesity drugs, but now with an oral approach.
Given these vast billion-dollar markets, how do you go about prioritizing what you'll pursue?
Yeah, so it's interesting. In the early years, we would have very much a laser-like focus on a few selective projects, and that was the way to go forward. But now, after 15 plus years, and I'm very proud to state this on behalf of my protagonist team, that we are in an amazingly stable financial situation. We have 600 million plus cash in the bank, which is going to last us through 2027. And even before we run out of that money over the next 2.5 years, we believe we could be receiving anywhere from 300 to 700 million of new money from our two partners, J&J and Takeda, which will even add further to our 600 million cash runway we have. And then on top of that, starting in 2027, which is where we anticipate the launch and commercialization of our two drugs, one by J&J and the other by Takeda. Our partnership is also involving a component of significant royalties. So, for example, with J&J, we get 6 to 10% royalty. And remember, I mentioned that the Stellara and Tremfya combined sales last year were 14 billion. So this is clearly the field of multi-billion dollar drugs. And you can imagine how 6 to 10% would translate nicely in revenue generation for the company. So I think financially we are at a very secured place. And then technology wise also, we have proven ourselves over and over again with different kind of projects. So now it's the question of like, okay, you are good and you have the financial support. How do you scale? So that's the challenge that we have in terms of like, rather than prioritization and selecting or deselecting, we are going back to our roots of drug discovery, of our peptide technology platform, and trying to introduce new projects with very different kind of assets over the coming years.
You alluded to this at the top, but peptides are not without their challenges. How are you able to address the issue of stability inside the body?
Yeah, so it's interesting, like how when you have the luxury of time on your side, then with a little bit of patience and a little bit of and a lot of focus and dedication, you can achieve and understand things that most people cannot. So in the very early days of Protagonist, we were a very skinny company, about a dozen employees, and largely unnoticed. So that was the phase where we took the time to sort of develop the technology platform, create some know-how about how to engineer oral stability into peptides, how to engineer chemical features that will give potency as good as antibody drugs, and also how to engineer characteristics that will allow them to move from the gut into the bloodstream, meaning making them orally bioavailable, right? So many different set of challenges. Oral stability is one of them. But when you are given a decade of time, when nobody is paying too much attention to you, that is when you perfect the craft, and then ultimately get yourself to a situation. And we are blessed to be in that situation where now you have the freedom and flexibility to apply it to many more projects. And ultimately, I mean, what this is going to do is create a wide variety of very well differentiated projects that are actually going to be in the hands of patients who need it the most. And we believe this journey in that regard, getting the drug in the hand of patients, it's going to start as early as 2027, right? In the field of biotech, you start out in 2008, and if you get a drug by 2027, that's a good thing. That's a good pace.
Well, walk me through how your platform technology work. How do you go from a target to a candidate?
Yeah, it's and I'll keep it a bit simple, and maybe I might be oversimplifying it, but it will give you a good idea. So the way our inspiration came originally was from Mother Nature. If you think about it, in nature and in living organisms and in plants and marine species, there are so many toxins that are out there that are being used for self defense mechanisms, right? The snake venom is a great example, for example, that. So, through evolutionary process, through hundreds of thousands of years, nature has perfected the production of chemical products that will have excellent defense mechanism kind of properties. When we take a look at a lot of those chemical structures, it turns out that they are dominantly cyclic peptides. So it's almost like nature has used peptides as a defense mechanism in various organisms. So that serves as our starting point, so to speak. What we have at Protagonist is we have a computational database, meaning structural information around a few thousand peptidic scaffolds. So when we come across a biological target of interest, the first thing we do is on the computer, we match the structure of the biological target of interest and screen it against these few thousand peptidic scaffolds that we have. And then we find the best matches. So after that, we go from the computational precision to the total randomness of that we create by what is referred to as phage libraries. And over here, what you do is on a bacteriophage, you basically start analoging peptides. You make analogs by the order of hundreds of thousands. And then when you pen those libraries, you can imagine that almost invariably you will get some peptides as hits or as starting points for drug discovery against that target of interest. Now, mind you that your initial starting point, it may have activity in the micromolar range, which means you will have to improve the potency by 3 to 4 orders of magnitude. It may have no stability to speak of, which means you will have to engineer stability into those peptides through your expertise and know-how, right? So it's a very iterative process. You start in a modest way through a de novo starting point that you get through the use of computational science as well as through phage libraries. And then you go through this process in an iterative fashion, but each time you also use your expertise in peptidomimetic chemistry and in medicinal chemistry to engineer the properties that will infer more potency and more stability to these peptides. And all along, you have to be mindful that you cannot sort of make them too big, otherwise, they are not going to be permeable. So, admittedly, what happens in our case is it takes us a little bit longer than it would typically take, let's say, any other company that is doing discovery through the classical small molecule approach. If it takes them, let's say, 12, 18 months to move from discovery to a development candidate, it's going to take us about 2.5 years to come to that point. But when we come to that point, we are highly differentiated and we are better than any typical classical oral small molecule approach that may be undertaking.
And to what extent can you engineer specific qualities into the peptide therapy, things like potency or specificity or solubility?
Yeah, in a lot of instances, you are robbing Paul to pay Peter, meaning you optimize one property to give up on the other. In a lot of instances, it will be like you have to take one step back in order to hope that you'll be able to take 2 steps forward. So all along, what we do at a practical level is right from the get-go, we start working simultaneously with at least 3 different scaffolds against the same biological target, because we know that we cannot just have the luxury of relying on only one scaffold. We may reach a dead end, or we may succeed, we don't know. But this approach of three has really worked very well for us. If you use 3 scaffolds at a starting point, then the chances are very high that you will find your way all the way through the finish line with at least one scaffold.
How challenging is it to manufacture these therapies, and is scaling manufacturing at all an issue?
Yeah, I certainly want to address that, but just one remark on the previous point I would make is like, we are often asked that, hey, who is your competition, or are there other peptide companies? And believe it or not, the competition is very slim, if at all anything, because let's face it, the path that we have chosen, it's not an easy one. It requires a lot of expertise and that kind of thing. It's like I'm able to remark on this now fluently because of the experience of 15 plus year in the field. So it makes us very unique that way. uh, yeah, with the I tell people that, look, if you look at our this rare disease drug rusfertide for polycythemia vera. Polycythemia vera is a disease where you have, let's say, a few 100,000 patients around the globe. It's a rare disease. Then, if you look at our next drug, JNJ-2113, for psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, there are a few million patients we are talking about. But now, when you refer to obesity, you're talking about hundreds of millions of patients who could be taking your drug. So, scale up, and especially the scale up and manufacturing of peptides, has come to the forefront, so to speak. As I mentioned before, both of these drugs, semaglutide and tirzepatide, these are both peptides. And now the demand for the drug is so high that neither of these companies, Novo Nordisk or Eli Lilly, are able to fulfill the demand. And that has brought this question of manufacturing capacity and all that. See, I'm a chemist by training, and what I would say is that when we started Protagonist, focused with a focus on peptide therapeutics in 2008, and when I try to recall the manufacturing capacity or the talent that was there at that time versus what we have now in 2024, there is a sea of change. So much progress has been made both by us as well as the CROs, the chemical manufacturers. And I think it is the same movie that will be played over the next decade because now peptides have become so much into prominence. Because of the peptide therapeutic, Eli Lilly is now the largest pharmaceutical company in the world. And it was not even a distant a close second or a third only 2 years ago, right? So everything has changed. Everybody is focused on how to improve on the scale up and manufacturing, and that is happening all across the globe. So, in my opinion, this is a transient problem rather than a permanent one, and the industry will figure it out.
And when you design your peptides, is manufacturability something you actually try to design into them?
Manufacturing as well as stability are two things that we would consider. And in manufacturing, it will also be like if we are using an unnatural amino acid, then what is the cost of that unnatural amino acid? Those are the kind of things that we consider. One thing that has happened, and this was true for small molecules, this is true for the injectable antibodies also. If the demand is high enough, then so many improvements come in process research and in scale up that ultimately the costs go down anyway. In the early years for a particular unnatural amino acid, we might have been paying, let's say, a $5,000 per kilo. But now, if we need a metric ton of that amino acid, then companies around the globe will become champions in that, and the cost will be, an order of magnitude less, or even two orders of magnitude less than the original cost. So efficiencies do come up. The world is full of chemical expertise. It's just that, they have to pay attention to specific problems. In this case, the amino acids and the peptide manufacturing, and things will start falling in place pretty rapidly, I would say.
You talked a bit about your partnerships with Takeda and J&J. Are you developing your own pipeline as well?
Oh, absolutely. So we have two new programs, or rather three new programs. So with Takeda, we have a partnership in the hematology space with our first product, rusfertide. We have another drug candidate in the hematology space, and we should be announcing a development candidate sometime by the end of the year, which will be fully owned by us. And when I say a development candidate, the way to look at it is like after a year from when we announce it, it will and start entering human clinical trials. In the I&I space, we have a partnership with J&J on the IO23 pathway blockers. Another very proven validated target in the I&I space is interleukin 17. So we have our own oral IO17 program, and that is fully owned by us in that space. And then in the obesity space, we are working on different programs centered around oral peptide kind of approach, and that is fully owned by us as well. So the partnerships have served us well, and now we are in a good position of strength, financially and technology wise. So this is the time for us to kind of start working on things that are fully owned by us.
How do you think about balancing partnerships with the development of your own pipeline?
Fantastic question. I think partnerships are a forum to create a win-win situation for both parties. So, with J&J, we did a partnership when we just had a program at a preclinical stage. It was a research collaboration. But the beauty of the partnership is now it has been 7+ years, and we have uh, gotten more than $150 million from J&J in different form of payments, and now the assets have moved into phase 3. With J&J, we went with J&J, and we had multiple choices at that stage, but we opted for J&J because of their expertise with the IL-23 injectable antibody drugs, Stelara and Tremfya, and that was the right decision for us to do. So the way we benefited was like, how they took charge of the program after a certain stage. With J&J, the deal was that we are in charge of discovery, preclinical development, and phase 1 studies in healthy volunteers. But after that, they do the heavy lifting and do the study in patients, and move it towards NDA filing, FDA approval, and commercialization. And that is exactly what they are doing right now. So that's benefits both parties. We kind of do what we are good at doing. Now, that was in 2017. The next partnership that we did was early this year around rusfertide, and it was not a preclinical deal or a clinical deal. Rusfertide was already in phase 3 stages of development. So this is a true co-development, co-commercialization type of partnership, right? So the idea is that, hey, a biotech like Protagonist, it's not going to become a commercial expert overnight. So why not don't we join hands with companies that have experience in the commercialization of hematology products? And Takeda is one of those premium companies in that space. Now, of course, if you do a deal around phase 3, you retain a lot of the big economics and things like that. So that's the purpose that these partnerships are helping us achieve. It's like, complete the circle with complementary expertise and know-how, and that way, you are doing full justice to your asset and also to the patients who need the drug the most.
As you think about the potential for oral peptides in the next decade or so, where do you see the biggest opportunities?
I would say the biggest opportunities are both in the inflammation immunomodulatory space as well as in the obesity space. In general, wherever there are chronic indications, and especially indications where one needs to take the treatment for the rest of their life, oral is the preferred option, hands down.
Dinesh Patel, CEO of Protagonist Therapeutics. Dinesh, thanks so much for your time today.
It was my real pleasure, and I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope the audience finds it equally stimulating and engaging.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.